Right in the middle of closing a deal in the restaurant, the waitress started speaking Italian. The businessmen were stunned. "Hello, friends. We present our new story. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell, like, and share your opinion in the comments." The noise of the cafe, the voices of customers, and the clinking of dishes had all become familiar to Victoria. The complex rhythm of her life. She skillfully glided between tables like a dancer, balancing a tray in one hand and trying to keep her fatigue from overwhelming her. Working as a waitress no longer seemed unusual to her. On the contrary, it had long become her everyday life. At 22, Victoria knew the value of hard work. She knew what it was like to fight for every day, squeezing out even a little hope from it. On the outskirts of the city, where the smell of old books and freshly brewed tea mixed with the cold that seemed to live in the walls all year round, there, in that small corner of the world, her childhood passed in the company of her mother Jennifer. Her father left when Victoria was just 3 years old. She had no memory of his face or voice, only vague shadows from her mother's stories and bitter remarks. They said, "He left for another woman, found someone richer." Jennifer never discussed it with her daughter, but Victoria could feel it. His departure was not just a betrayal for her, but something bigger, something that shattered her belief in justice. Life without a man in the house meant constant sacrifices. Jennifer worked as a librarian at the school where Victoria studied. To help her mother make ends meet, Victoria grew up wearing clothes that kind colleagues of Jennifer brought over, and sometimes clothes found at sales. She never asked for anything extra, knowing that every cent in their household was already earmarked for food, bills, and medicine for her mother, who often fell ill. Classmates never missed a chance to remind her of this. Their words burned, but Victoria learned early on to keep a straight face. She didn't argue, cry, or complain to her mother, just silently walked home, shut herself in her room, and buried herself in books, in stories about distant lands where no one knew her surname or whispered behind her back. Jennifer raised her tired gaze to her. In front of her on the table lay neatly stacked bills. There was no reproach in her voice, only fatigue. "Waitressing in a cafe. This is only temporary, just to help out." Jennifer set the pen aside, seeming to digest what she had just heard. "Vicky, you need to study, not run around in restaurants." "Mum, enough." For the first time, Victoria dared to speak firmly. "You've spent your entire life on me. Now it's my turn." The words hung in the air for a few seconds. They looked at each other, and then Jennifer sighed heavily, but did not argue. Thus began her journey. Working in the cafe was a different universe, with customers in expensive suits, generous but indifferent smiles, the sparkle of glassware, and ever-present music. But Victoria didn't complain. She was used to long days, empty pockets, and the perpetual feeling of a lack of time. Now she had a goal. And although she didn't know how much longer she could hold on, she knew one thing. She would never return to the helplessness her mother had lived in. She would find a way. She would get out no matter what. The clinking of glasses and muffled voices of customers accompanied Victoria every day, like a never-ending background to her life in the cafe. At Yankee Cafe, there was no room for pauses. Every guest demanded attention, every dish had to be served on time. But even in such a rhythm, Victoria managed to smile. She knew her smile brought not only tips, but also hope that maybe one day life would get easier. Working with Peter was a real trial. The man with predatory eyes seemed to burn through her slightest mistakes. His presence was always felt, even if he was just passing by. "Victoria, what is this spot?" His cold voice rang out as she returned from another order. "It's a drop of sauce. Sorry, I'll clean it up right now." She instinctively reached for a napkin, but Peter just squinted. "A $20 fine. Be more careful next time." The words struck like a whip. Victoria felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. She lowered her eyes to hide her emotions. A thought passed through her mind. Why is he so strict? Doesn't he understand we have our own problems too? But Victoria knew arguing was pointless. Peter didn't tolerate excuses. Natalie, her colleague, once said, "Listen, don't take it to heart. He's like that with everyone. Just follow the rules and he'll leave you alone." But Victoria couldn't get used to the injustice. Every fine, every stern look from Peter felt like a test of her resilience. Her anger wasn't directed at him, but at the circumstances that forced her to stay in this place, only growing stronger. One evening in the staff room, Natalie saw Victoria writing something in a notebook. "Studying again?" she smirked. "Yes," Victoria replied without looking up. "I have a test in Italian tomorrow." "Italian? Who needs that? You should be learning Chinese. They're taking over business everywhere." Victoria just smiled. Her dream was like a guiding star for her, distant but clear. She didn't care what her colleagues thought. She knew that someday this knowledge would change her life. After work, she lingered in the kitchen, cleaning dishes. Her hands ached from constant work, and her legs felt like they were made of cotton. She stood by the sink, staring at the stream of water, and suddenly felt a sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't a physical sensation, but rather a heaviness pressing from within. Her life felt like running in place. Long shifts, fatigue, barely noticeable progress in her studies, and constant worry about her mother. Coming home, she found Jennifer sitting by the window. The moon silvered her hair, giving her an almost otherworldly appearance. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Victoria sat down next to her, taking her cold hand in hers. "I'm fine, sweetheart. And you?" Jennifer looked at her closely, as if seeing right through her. "Tired, but okay." Victoria tried to smile, but felt her voice tremble, betraying her. At that moment, she suddenly realized how little time she had. She heard the doctor's voice in her head. The surgery shouldn't be delayed. Victoria grasped her mother's hand more tightly, as if afraid she might disappear. The next day, she approached Peter with a request for additional shifts. "Victoria, you already work more than the others. Are you sure you can handle it?" His look was skeptical. "I really need this. I can handle it, I promise," she responded almost pleadingly. He was silent for a while, then gave a short nod. "All right, but remember, one more slip-up, and I'll have to reconsider your schedule." Victoria left his office feeling both a sense of relief and anxiety. Now her days were meticulously planned by the minute. Studying, working, taking care of her mother. Everything blended into one. She tried not to think about how her strength was depleting. The only thing that kept her going was the thought that it was all for her mother. But more and more often, as she fell asleep at night, she wondered, how much longer can I live like this? Yankee Cafe was packed to the brim. Victoria glided between tables, balancing a tray like a circus performer. That evening, the place was especially lively. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of fresh pastries and spices filled the air. But what caught her attention were the new guests, 5 men in strict business suits. Their confident movements and reserved manners immediately set them apart from the rest. When Victoria approached the table, one of the men looked up. "Good evening, we need a more secluded table," he said in English with a slight accent. She nodded, smiling. "Of course, I'll arrange that right away." Within a few minutes, the men were seated in a corner where they could conduct their negotiations in peace. Victoria took their order, but as she returned to the bar, she caught a phrase in Italian out of the corner of her ear. "We need full control over the money flow so they won't suspect a thing." Her heart skipped a beat. For her, Italian was like a second nature, a language of dreams, but now it sounded like a tool for deceit. "Maybe I misunderstood," she tried to reassure herself, but the uneasy feeling didn't let go. Victoria approached Natalie, who was resting by the bar. Can you imagine? Those guys at the table are Italians and they're speaking in their own language. So what? You're learning it. Show them what you've got. Natalie shrugged. Victoria smirked. The thing is, they don't know. I understand every word. Returning to the kitchen, she couldn't shake off the sense of unease. Snippets of phrases she had heard started to form a clearer picture. The Italians were discussing a deal that, judging by their words, was a fraud. It's not my business, she thought, trying to convince herself, but her conscience wouldn't let her go. When she approached their table again, one of the Italians said, "These Americans won't even realize they're being deceived. Only a fool would back out." Those words finally unsettled her. Victoria felt her hands trembling as she placed the glasses on the table. An inner voice was screaming, "Say something! You can't stay silent." Gathering all her courage, she took a step forward and said in perfect Italian, "Excuse me, but I can't allow you to continue." The Italians froze like statues, their eyes filled with surprise. One of them raised an eyebrow. "Who are you to interfere?" His voice was loud, attracting the attention of other guests. Victoria braced herself, but didn't let fear take over. She turned to the American partners who were looking at her in confusion. "I'm sorry, but they're deceiving you. Their contract is a fraud." The men exchanged glances. "Explain," one of them said sternly. Victoria took a deep breath, gathered her thoughts, and recounted what she had heard, first in English, then repeated it in Italian, addressing the foreigners. The faces of the Italians turned pale. The masks of friendliness and confidence disappeared. "That's a lie," said one of them, but his voice lacked the confidence it had before. "We'll see," the American responded curtly, cutting off their protests. The ensuing events unfolded in a blur. The American men asked a few clarifying questions, and then their conversation with the Italians grew heated. Victoria watched from afar, her hands trembling. She realized she had interfered in someone else's business and now could be out of a job, but she felt a strange sense of relief. A few minutes later, the Italians left the cafe, indignantly muttering to each other. One of the Americans who had concluded the negotiations approached Victoria. "You saved us. Without you, we could have lost everything." His words were warm and sincere. He then added, "If you truly know Italian, I have an offer for you." Victoria looked at him, unable to believe her ears. This moment marked the beginning of a new life for her. The American's words echoed in her mind. "I have an offer for you." She stood behind the counter, trying to process what had happened. Everyone was looking at her. Colleagues, customers, even Peter, who was usually unflappable. Now his face betrayed a mixture of surprise and concealed irritation. "Well," the American continued. His voice was calm but firm. "We could discuss the terms later, but it seems you've already proven that you deserve trust." Victoria swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the room's attention pressing down on her. "Thank you," she finally managed to say. "But what exactly are you offering?" The American smiled slightly. "A job as a translator in our company. We've been looking for a specialist with knowledge of Italian, and you've proven you can not only understand the language, but also make important decisions." These words left her in a mild shock. She couldn't believe that a dream that seemed so distant had suddenly become real. However, a worry immediately crept into her mind. What about her current job, the income she earned for her mother's treatment? Victoria stayed at the cafe until the end of her shift, almost on autopilot. Peter, with pursed lips, merely told her after work, "Come to my office." She knew it was going to be a difficult conversation. When she entered, he was sitting at his desk, flipping through papers. He looked up at her and said, "You know I value employees who work precisely and without unnecessary emotions." "I know." She nodded, trying not to show how her hands were shaking. "But today you decided to stand out." Steele entered his voice. "That's not something I approve of. You've jeopardized the calm of the establishment, interfered." "But I couldn't do otherwise," Victoria said. He looked at her for a long time, as if weighing something inside himself, then gave a short nod. "Commendable, but such actions rarely come without consequences. I hope you understand our collaboration has come to an end." Those words felt like a sentence, but Victoria didn't feel pain. Instead, a spark of freedom lit up in her soul. She quietly said, "Thank you for everything." She returned home later than usual. Jennifer was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through medicines. "Vicky, you're late today," she said with slight concern. "Everything's fine." Victoria paused in the doorway, took a deep breath, and exhaled. "Mom, I quit my job today." Jennifer looked at her daughter in surprise. "Quit? Why?" Victoria sat down next to her and told her everything about the conversation with the Italians, the conflict with her boss, and of course the job offer from the American. Jennifer was silent, listening to every word. When Victoria finished, her mother quietly said, "You did the right thing. Sometimes you need to take a risk to win." Those words became the support Victoria needed. The next day, the meeting with her new boss, Jeff, took place in his company's office. The spacious room with panoramic windows gave a view of the bustling city, making an impression on her. "I'm glad you accepted my offer," he said, inviting her to sit. "We're ready to discuss the terms of your employment." Victoria felt that she wasn't just offered a translator position, but a chance to find her place in a large company she could only dream of. The conditions were generous: a decent salary, an opportunity for professional growth, and a flexible schedule that allowed her to take care of her mother. "I agree," she said, hardly containing her joyful smile. Jeff smiled. "Welcome to our team." Relieved from the tension of quitting and realizing she could now afford her mother's operation, Victoria felt a huge burden lift off her shoulders. On the day Jennifer was discharged, she looked happy and full of energy. "Vicky," she said, hugging her daughter, "thank you. I couldn't have made it without you." Victoria smiled. "Now it's your turn to rest." These words were said with a light heart. Victoria felt that life was finally starting to change direction. Several months passed since she received the offer from Jeff. Her life changed drastically. Working at Global Partners became not only a chance for professional growth, but also an opportunity to be around people who inspired and supported her. Jeff, who initially seemed strict and reserved, turned out to be a person who valued hard work and sincerity. Victoria remembered her first day at work as if it was yesterday. Jeff personally gave her a tour of the office, introduced her to colleagues. Their respectful gazes and kind words immediately made her feel that here she wouldn't be judged for her past or mistakes. One day, a few weeks after starting work, Jeff invited Victoria to dinner. It was an informal conversation, but there was an undeniable spark between them. Evenings spent in warm conversations, walks under the stars, all of this brought them closer. Jennifer, seeing her daughter gradually coming back to life, often smiled. "Vicky, you've become entirely different." "In the best way," Victoria joked. "Of course your eyes are glowing." These words delighted Victoria. She felt she was truly changing. No longer was she the girl who feared losing her job over a stain on her apron. Now she was confident, knew what she wanted, and saw a future ahead. 6 months later, Jeff proposed to Victoria. It happened during one of their park walks. A gentle breeze played with her hair, the sun filtering through the tree canopies. Jeff stopped and, looking into her eyes, said, "Victoria, I have never met such a strong and kind person. Victoria, will you marry me?" Without hesitation, Victoria replied, "Yes." The wedding was modest but cozy. Jennifer, finally recovered after the operation, glowed with happiness watching her daughter. Jeff, always serious in business, was genuinely happy that day. After the wedding, Jeff decided to fulfill Victoria's long-held dream, a trip to Florence. When he showed her the tickets, she couldn't hold back her tears of joy. "You have no idea how much I've dreamed of this," she whispered, hugging him. Florence greeted them with narrow streets, the aroma of freshly brewed espresso, and the chimes of church bells. They wandered the city, admired its majestic architecture, and sampled Italian cuisine. At sunset, they climbed a viewpoint offering a golden-lit panorama of the city. "It's so beautiful here," Victoria said, gazing at the horizon. "Not as beautiful as you," Jeff replied, holding her hand firmly. This trip was more than just a dream come true. It symbolized a new life filled with happiness and opportunities. Upon returning home, Victoria made it her mission to make each day special. She knew there was still much to do, but now she had support. Jeff had become not just a husband, but a true pillar of strength for her. One evening, she prepared dinner, waiting for him to return from work. When Jeff walked in, Victoria greeted him with a beaming smile. "Did something happen?" he asked, noticing her excitement. She nodded, taking his hand. "We're going to have a baby." Jeff froze for a moment, then laughed, lifted her into his arms, and spun her around. "This is the best gift you could have given me," he said, looking at her with love. Victoria felt that her life had finally found its purpose. Everything she had gone through, all the hardships, fears, and deprivations had led her to this moment. Now she had a family, dreams that were coming true, and confidence that only the best awaited ahead. Did you enjoy this story? Tell us your thoughts in the comments. Give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to not miss new releases. See you soon.